Back the blue. Somebody posted online that like 40 to 50% of police forces were corrupt by having abusive officers. So I looked that up on the AI, which, we know is subject for fault. But this is what it came back with. Based on available studies and data, the claim that 50% of the police force consists of abusers is not supported by evidence. The widely cited statistic on this issue is that 40% of police officer families experience domestic abuse, not that 40% or 50% of officers are abusers. Okay, so the distinction is that 40% of police officer families experience domestic violence. So that should make everyone feel better. The 40% statistic explains the source comes from two studies conducted in the early 1990s, specifically studies by Johnson 1991 and Nedig, Russell, and Sang 1992. What it actually means, these studies found that 40% of police officer families experience domestic violence, a number that includes cases where either the officer was abusive or the officer's partner was abusive towards them. I think either way what this shows is that police, hire the wrong people with intent, it would appear. Alternative findings. One of these studies, when specifically tracking the officer as the perpetrator, found that about 20% of surveyed officers admitted to committing acts of violence, while 33% reported having been victims of domestic violence by their partners. So it looks like an even split between either the officers or their partners. So, I don't know. I don't know how to interpret that. Except that if you're in the Major League Baseball Association and you're batting 280 or 330, you're probably going to have a job next year. Comparison to general population, the study suggested that domestic violence in police families is 2 to 4 times more common than the general population. So again, not hiring the right people. Contextualizing the data, outdated data, these studies are from the early 1990s and may not accurately reflect the current situation, though newer data is scarce. Now, why in the age of information and technology would newer data be scarce? Why would we have more information about abusive officers from the 1990s than we would in 2026? Gee, I wonder. Do you think maybe they're hiding that data for a reason? What motive could they possibly have? Methodology issues. The 40% figure is heavily debated, with critics pointing out that the studies were small and used self-reported data. Kind of like self-investigating. Underreporting. Because police officers are trained in surveillance and know how to avoid detection, domestic violence within their homes often goes unreported. Again, that should make everyone feel better. Structural issue. Despite the potential inaccuracies in the 40% figure, researchers still agree that officer-involved domestic violence, OIDV, is a significant problem that is not isolated to a few bad apples. Gee, you don't say. So what's the accurate number now based on all data, omitted data, and all something known? A 2016 systematic review and 2025 scoping review of multiple studies across decades found pooled rate across various studies with different methodologies. The pooled rate for officer-perpetrated domestic violence is estimated 21.2%. Individual studies report rates ranging from as low as 4.8% to the historical 40% figure. Research consistently suggests that domestic violence may be up to 2 to 4 times more prevalent in police families than in the general public. Why are these people given guns and badges if they're 2 to 4 times more likely to have abuse within their own family, why do they have guns and badges? Omitted and dark data factors. Experts identify several structural reasons why the official number likely underrepresents reality. Conviction rates. This is great. National data from 2026 suggests only 10% of police domestic violence arrests result in a conviction. And the overall national conviction rate for officer perpetrator sits near 1.8%. You know what those numbers remind me of? A little bit. They're pretty close to the CPS substantiated claim rate. Like, very, very close. I wonder if there's any correlation there. Agency accountability, roughly 88% of departments do not audit their responses to officer-involved domestic violence. And why should they, right? I mean, that's bad publicity for them. It's not like the general public deserves to know. Underreporting. Victims often fear reporting because the investigation is handled by their abusers, colleagues, or friends. Yeah, other guys with guns and badges who protect the other Freemasons. Additionally, officers' training in surveillance and evidence makes them uniquely capable of avoiding detection. Shout out to Newington Police. Where's that October 3rd, 2025 fire report and body cam footage with CAD report and everything else that you guys are clowning on right now? Omission in policies. A significant portion of departments, up to 45%, in some surveys, have no specific written policy for handling domestic violence involving their own officers. I guess that's a convenient non-policy to have. Current trajectories. Current indicators show that while police shootings and fatal force have seen slight declines, a 5% drop in 2025 compared to 2024, general domestic violence incidents involving officers are described as a structural failure rather than isolated misconduct. So it sounds to me like it is a perpetual problem that is not going away unless we all address it.